some good food, and later with the sounds of our choir, because we need to keep afloat, even as we deal with these very, very, very serious and difficult subjects. So many of you have probably turned on the radio and heard the sound of Peggy's voice being interviewed, or possibly on TV also. I've only heard you on the radio, but TV also, right? And Peggy speaks all over. She speaks all over. She has been everywhere. And Peggy, it's so amazing to welcome you to your own home here, to your own community. And Rabbi Rim, I know that this has become such an area of passion for you. And we're going to begin this evening with your words.
Thank you very much, Beth. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And of course, it's sort of a sad pleasure because I didn't think that this day would come when anti-Semitism would be the form it is. On the first Saturday night of July, 1985, my phone rang in New City, New York. I was the outgoing educational director of New City Jewish Center, and I was about to leave in a few days for my first job here in the Boston area. I answered the phone and someone said, "Rabbi, you have to come over to the center. A bomb has exploded there. And Rabbi Sosland, the rabbi of the center, is in Arizona visiting family. You're in charge." I went over. Now, this is in 1985, when the country was not filled with terror the way it is now. So while there were policemen and firemen there, and the side of the sanctuary was blown out, it was all glass. Otherwise, the building was intact, and they asked me to unlock the door and go inside. That's the way police procedures were in those days. I had the key. The door was still intact. I walked inside. I didn't think anything of it. As I said, it was early in the country's understanding of terrorist acts. The second discussion that took place, and this might surprise you, was among the police and me, and the president of the congregation was, is this an anti-Semitic act or not? There were no swastikas. Someone said, maybe it was just kids fooling around with some big firecrackers or what have you, because again, the building wasn't structurally damaged. It was clearly like just the windows were blown out. And at New City Jewish Center, still today, there's a great miracle that people attribute to the fact that none of the light bulbs in the Yortzeit plaques were blown out, right? The Yortzeit plaques were all intact. The next day, the phone started ringing off the hook when the local clergy wanted to know how we should respond. I called up Henry Sosland, a wonderful man from whom I've learned so much, and he said, let's just have a Friday night service as usual, in the annex. We don't want to have a lot of ministers, the town manager come. This is a private event for us. At least that is how it was in my memory. The service was packed, of course, but in 1985, understanding anti-Semitism was seen as learning something about the Holocaust. It was a virus that might erupt from time to time in America, but it couldn't happen here. I was naive. We were naive. Around the world, leaders have found out that one of the easiest tools to use to create group cohesion and maintain power is to create a world in which there's us versus them. Hatred brings people together in large groups, perhaps more effectively than love does, which is very frightening and very sad for me to say about the nature of human beings after all these years of working with them. Now, we're in a new time of confronting anti-Semitism, and not just anti-Semitism, but the paradigm of us versus them. I put it that way because I want to be careful. When I graduated the seminary in 1975, the point of the rabbinate, I thought, was to create Jews, to keep Hitler from having, as it was said, a posthumous victory. That is the way it was conceived. Jewish continuity was the watchword. But a more universal and spiritual understanding of Judaism developed. I was made aware of it when I was hired to be the founding head of the Rashi School. The vision statement of the Rashi School said, religion in general, and Judaism in particular, offer tools and guidance for the major challenges of human existence. Judaism was and is joyous and helps us live well, whether we're born Jewish, converted to Judaism, or just hang out with the Jewish community. And other religions do the same. I don't want to give up on that kind of Jewish identity. On the other hand, it's clear that times they are changing. We become aware that our own country, the United States, was founded on positive principles of living, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and also with the conscious exclusion of the other, of Blacks, of Native Americans, and of women at the very start of the country. And that exclusion, that us versus them, has continued and increased in virulence and violence. Now, I'm very glad that Peggy is going to speak and teach us how to respond to anti-Semitism, how we can incorporate, and this, if I had a key sentence, it would be this: how do we incorporate these tools for response as part of our Jewish journey? Now, I wish we could have our Jewish journey be about spiritual things, right? The joy of prayer, the ethical personal improvements of Musar study, the intricacies of Bible and Talmud study, the joy of holidays. But I think right now we need to learn the tools of combating anti-Semitism. Now, I'm going to admit that there's a subtle danger in this approach of combating anti-Semitism that presents itself to us. The hatred of the other, when we are the other, can provoke inside of ourselves a hatred back at the other. I want to fight against the very paradigm of dividing the world into us versus them. I want to make allies across the intersectionality of hatreds that are prevalent in this country. There is a we, a unity, and a connectedness of human beings that I treasure and value. And somehow, love your neighbor as yourself must include all of our neighbors. Few examples to illustrate this last point about the we that I care about the fight, not just in favor of the Jewish people, but against us versus them. Once, many years ago, one of the classes in the school in Winchester was going to see the Stoneham Playhouse to see Miracle on 34th Street. I was the rabbi here at the time. Some people in town felt excluded and were offended. The principal at the time then canceled the trip and refunded everybody's money, which just offended other people. Over what? Was that anti-Semitic, or just a lack of awareness of the multiple dimensions of identity in the school system? When Dave Betcher and Jesse Bear Khan were seniors at Winchester High School and outstanding members of the school, class president on the sports team, some swastikas were found in the boys' bathroom. Jesse got on the loudspeaker and talked about how awful these symbols were. And the next day there were more.
Who's the sound? Oh, shit.
Anti-Semitic. No question about it. And of course, Dave and Jesse were not opening to bullying. And other people here will remember more than I the resolution to that issue that occurred. One of my rabbi friends came back from Memorial Day celebration this week on Monday and said that he was a little put out when the Catholic priest ended a prayer with, "And so we say in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord." I want to say clearly that there are two ways to use religious language in an interfaith context. We can try to make everything inoffensive and universal, or we can bring the best of our own religious tradition to the situation with deep respect. It is this second view that guides me. I'd rather have deeply held religious language used, knowing that there are many languages for the divine and the spiritual life than make everything a sort of religious music. But reasonable people can disagree, right? For me, the kind of religious language used in religious context is a matter of taste, not principle. When my son Ben married a very believing Lutheran named Julie, I co-officiated at their wedding with her minister. There was a chuppah and a ketubah that had a cross on it. And there was English and Hebrew and blessings in Jesus' name. And my grandkids from that marriage are being raised strongly in both traditions. Lila and Jack Meyerowitz will go with their dad to temple and their mom to church. And they'll be the kind of spiritual people that they will discover they are. And I have no idea what that is like, right? It's not bad. In fact, it's a good thing. It's what I mean when I say there's no us versus them. There's only a we of interconnected humanity. I'm going to turn things over to Peggy now to help us understand this world that we're in and to give us new tools for combating anti-Semitism as a necessary part of our Jewish identity. Thank you very much.
So hopefully I'll get this technology right. A little different than what I expected, but that's a tall order for me to feel like I need to give you tools that will address this ginormous issue. And it's a problem that is really bigger than all of us, but that can't mean that we don't figure out ways to address it. And I really want to thank you, Rabbi Rim, for both personalizing what it is to experience anti-Semitism and how each of us has within us and within our tradition and community the power to respond. So in my work, I spend a lot of time in the community, both the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community, talking about anti-Semitism, what it is, how many incidents we have, how people can respond. That it exists for some people, that's a surprise. And I want to just, before we launch into some more detail, give you some of the grounding points that I often make and want to share with you tonight. So first one, just because we're talking about anti-Semitism doesn't mean there aren't other compelling issues or marginalized communities experiencing really horrible challenges. It just happens to be that tonight we're centering anti-Semitism, but we don't want to go down the road of comparing one ism with another. This is just one we're shining a spotlight on for the moment. As a related point, none of us should feel timid about calling it out or feel intimidated in doing so. There are many, many people in our greater community who don't really realize that anti-Semitism is a real issue today and is manifesting in some really horrible ways. And it's on us to raise that awareness. And in fact, I want to call out that we're at a particular moment of vulnerability for the Jewish community. Even without going into the violence that was at Poway or Colleyville or Pittsburgh or just, not too many miles away in Brighton. The nature of anti-Semitism today is more organized through extremists. It's more pervasive based on online misinformation and disinformation, and more normalized in everyday conversation and in the media. Just spend like 5 minutes listening to political discourse and count the number of times someone insinuates something Jewish with a reference to George Soros. And we're also at a historical point. The acknowledgement by the White House of anti-Semitism, in fact, the entire first section of that report is about raising awareness and education. That's really like monumental for any country, but ours. So that's again indicative of it's a moment. So many of the tools and strategies that I'm going to talk about are tools that you can apply when you want to speak out and confront racism, anti-immigrant hate, anti-LGBTQ plus hate. So they're pretty much universal tools, even though there are some unique qualities to what anti-Semitism is. And a final word before we take a walk through the numbers and the common tropes and what you can do in response is that I hope that at the end of this conversation, you feel empowered. We are going to be talking about anti-Semitism tonight, just again, further grounding as a system of oppression. It's something more than individual prejudiced attitudes or isolated incidents. It's an amalgamation of formal and informal policies and practices, of cultural norms, social dynamics, and misguided beliefs used to justify the persecution of Jews over time. Thinking of it sort of more systemically is important, and to get beyond the individual incidents that any of us might have felt at different points of time. It sort of allows us to collectively address it as a community. All right, let me see if I got this right here. Okay. So what I wanted to start with is just kind of what we've seen this year. If you look at the top left corner, what you see is a synagogue. It's a Young Israel synagogue in Los Angeles. In February, two visibly observant Jewish men left that synagogue, walked down the street, and were shot at. The perpetrator was found, harbored, a lot of anti-Semitic beliefs, but this was Los Angeles in February of this year. Bottom left-hand corner, those sausages, I'm looking at you, Steve, you know these are Milwaukee bratwurst, right? But aren't fully arranged to look like swastikas. They were located across the street from a Chabad center on a Shabbat in Florida. Again, a very intentional act by a group of people who made it their Saturday afternoon to be this disruptive and intimidating to the Jewish community. Top right-hand corner, Daytona Speedway in Florida. Sign, it's a little hard to read. Henry Ford was right about the Jews. That group is like a group known as the Goyim Defense League, and they have their actions almost every weekend somewhere in this country. Bottom right-hand corner, same group with a Heil Hitler salute over a freeway overpass in Los Angeles. And in the middle, how many of you were aware that February 25th was a designated day of hate? Targeting, yeah. So, that is all of this happened in the last few months. Lest you think this doesn't happen in Massachusetts. Here's just a snapshot of a lot of headlines that, and all of these are incidents that kind of cross my desk at ADL. But, parents who call us because there are swastikas and targeting of their LGBTQ plus students, swastikas at Dartmouth College, anti-Semitic graffiti in Framingham and Natick train stations, kind of painted in a way to get maximum attention. Jewish students in central Massachusetts taking months and months of harassment before they kind of got together and called it out. So people think this doesn't happen in Massachusetts, and I have to tell you, think again. I don't want to leave the headlines, though, without saying that what we have in Massachusetts that's different is that we've been able to hold people accountable. So when the swastikas appeared on the lawn of a woman in Stoneham, it took several months, but there was an investigation, and the DA is prosecuting this woman with a hate crime violation. So there is accountability, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. Similarly, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, one youth went on a rampage. 22 local businesses were marred with swastikas, with crosses, with racist slurs. Again, the attorney general there is prosecuting that as a hate crime. That doesn't happen in other parts of the country. So there is some accountability. And finally, I never thought I would see the day when our president would need to tweet that the Holocaust happened. And that is kind of where we are. But where we also are is, a president who has launched a White House national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. So I wanted to give you this sort of information because when you're out in the community and people say, like, anti-Semitism isn't a real problem anymore, that's a problem of the past, you can have some ammunition to say, actually, it is a problem of the present, and it's happening right here in Massachusetts. So I don't want to spend too much time, on a really formal definition. We talked about this a little bit already about thinking about anti-Semitism, not as when somebody makes, a remark to you that touches on religion, but looking at it more systemically. But we talk about it in terms of, that system of oppression based on stereotypes, myths, and disinformation about Jewish people, Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. I do want to point out at this point that it's really important for us as a Jewish community to recognize that we want the non-Jewish community to recognize us as Jews, but we also need to make sure we recognize that our own community is not a monolithic community. And there are many people within it with intersecting identities, and that makes their situation, both as Jewish and maybe another member of another marginalized community, something we need to be more aware of in all of our work and our interactions. So I'm going to jump to some numbers and someone shout out, how many anti-Semitic incidents do you think there were in the US in 2022? Just raise your hand if you think it's more than 5,000. Okay, well, I actually the number's a little less, about 3,700, but that was close. So how many in Massachusetts? More or less, more than 500? More than 400? Okay. We had 205. And where do you think Massachusetts ranks among the 50 states in terms of the number? 2. Actually, that was a trick question. Massachusetts, in terms of anti-Semitic incidents, ranks number 6, which is nothing to be proud of. Nor should we be proud that the rate of increase is higher than the national rate of increase. Massachusetts ranks second in the number of white extremist propaganda incidents, second only to Texas. So that's, if you've heard, Massachusetts is second. So those incidents are things like banner drops. We'll go into this in a little bit. They might be targeting the Jewish community one day, the Black community the next, the LGBTQ plus community the next, all in an effort to intimidate people and make people feel unwelcome in their own communities. So more or less anti-Semitic incidents in Massachusetts in 2022 than 2021. That's a gimme. More. So here you can just see the trend line. I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but you can see each year the numbers are going up, and that on the right-hand side, that red sliver is assaults. That would be like Rabbi Niginsky in 2021. It would be the huge uptick that we're seeing, particularly in New York, with assaults on the Orthodox Jewish community. And of course, it includes the Colleyville assaults. In terms of location where we're seeing this, anywhere from cemeteries to schools, non-Jewish schools, homes, and public areas. To me, one of the most troubling things that we saw this year was a doubling of the number of incidents that took place in people's homes. When something like this crosses your threshold, you feel particularly unwelcome and unsafe in your own community. So these are the numbers. I mentioned the Goyim Defense League, which is a very loose confederation of anti-Semites. They are very busy, particularly in the South and the West of the United States, not so prevalent in New England, but their tactics are being adopted by other groups. What they tend to do is take these Ziploc bags, weight them down with pellets of some sort. It could be rocks, it could be rice, it could be popcorn, and fill them with horribly anti-Semitic information. Each month, they have a calendar targeting some with some sort of theme. This is the November one, Name the Nose November. Again, it's a tactic that crosses the threshold of people's homes and is very intimidating. So I want to put that out there because in a few minutes, we'll talk about what happens when this takes place in your own community. I think I'm not going to go into, well, I want to just take 30 seconds to introduce the most common anti-Semitic tropes. You know, we have probably people are familiar with them, and I'll point out that if you're interested, I'm not going to play it now. ADL has a 2 to 3 minute video on each of these that are a very effective way of sharing with other people just what it means to say, Jews control the banks, Jews control the media, Jews are greedy, Jews control the weather. So, you know, we've got it all here, but they're important to just call out, you know, power, disloyalty, greed, deicide, blood, Holocaust denial, and anti-Zionism. So I will let you go to YouTube and find this because what I'd rather do is spend more time talking about what we all can do to respond. So I've left on the tables what we call the Good Fight Handbook. And there are a lot of QR codes to resources that include those videos that I talked about. But I want to give you, to start off, the framework that we talk about for individuals in the community. We kind of frame it in terms of speaking up to let your voice be heard, interrupting hate when you hear it. So you have to practice and build that muscle. Report incidents, because sadly, people don't believe this stuff happens. And it's only when they see numbers that it gets some attention. Ask your elected officials to listen, take action. You know, one thing that we were talking about over dinner is even taking action to present key Jewish holidays to the people who control the town meeting schedule. You know, I have been involved in situations where town meeting was held on Kol Nidre, and the governing officials of those towns, some of them surrounding Winchester, throw up their hands and they say, you have so many holidays that, you know, we just can't find a date. So, you know, that needs to really be a conversation to explain which holidays are important and need to be observed in a particular way, and that by having a town meeting on Kol Nidre, you're disenfranchising a portion of your community. Showing strength is a second category. People who are victims of anti-Semitism feel incredibly isolated and intimidated and oftentimes embarrassed. You know, what am I doing wrong? Why are people picking on me? And knowing that they have a community makes a huge difference. And that is a skill and a technique that can extend from our Jewish community to any other community that's targeted by any hateful group or hateful action. But it's really our responsibility to speak out. And when we do that together, and I'm going to show you some examples of where that was hugely effective, it does make a difference. And then sharing facts. You know, we need to, people get a lot of crazy information right now, and that emboldens them to act on their hate. And it's, again, on us to get the correct information so we can interrupt that. So this is the example that I wanted to show you. I never show the picture on the left without showing the picture on the right. The picture on the left is the freeway overpass in Saugus on Route 114. And the photo is from September 11th. 3 masked men held a sign that said Jews did 9/11. Everybody who drove by was impacted. It's one incident. 3 people with masks wreaked that kind of fear and havoc in our community in a couple hours time. What happened after that was really extraordinary. There was both a rally, as often happens, and that is important, but that community decided to take back the bridge, so that the last thing that people remembered about that bridge was not that 3 masked men stood on it and held a sign that said Jews did 9/11, but the community came together and said, this is our bridge. They don't represent us. So I use that as really a beautiful example of a response from a community that was, it involved interfaith clergy, it involved many civic leaders, it involved local police, and it of course involved the Jewish community. So now I want to ask a question. What would you do if this was airdropped on your phone or the phone of your kid in school? It's an athletic shoe. Instead of the swish, it's a swastika. This happened. It happened in Swampscott. And just about everybody at the high school got this inadvertently, it turns out, because the kid didn't realize he was airdropping to the entire high school. Well, the school responded in a very interesting way. They first of all, they worked with both the students who were impacted by this, because it was really troubling to not just the Jewish students, but many others who understood what the symbol meant. And they worked with the student who airdropped it, who didn't know what a swastika was. So they turned it into a teachable moment, and even to the point where there was a meeting between the Jewish students and the student who airdropped this. But, again, when you have something happen in a school, it's never if it's going to happen, it's when. And this was a school that was ready to respond. And I'm going to point out some resources, because one of the takeaways from this is something we can all do with schools in our community is make sure they have the resources so they're ready to respond when this happens. Here's another one. I mean, like people know my kids were all playing a lot of sports, and I heard from a school actually in New Hampshire. Some students said, I was on the lacrosse team last year, and my coach used to say, we're going to do the Hitler drill. I was like, yikes. So what did you do? He said, I did nothing because I was the only Jewish student on the team. And I was like, I never got any playing time, and I wanted to be a team player, but it was really horrible. So, what do you do in that situation? There's a strange power dynamic with a coach, and I will tell you what we did. He was no longer on the team the next year, but instead of singling out that school, we contacted the governing body of lacrosse in New Hampshire and said, we are hearing that coaches are calling this drill a Hitler drill. Let us explain to you what this means. Send out something that says, call it, a stretching drill, call it Frankenstein's, call it something other than a Hitler drill. And they did that. So, that was something that anyone in this room could do if confronted with something like this. And then practice strategies to respond. I mean, we all hear anti-Semitism in everyday conversation, whether it's, oh, you must work in accounting because you're Jewish and you're good with numbers, or you should be the treasurer of this club. I mean, that still happens. And knowing how to interrupt those comments is a skill that we all can practice. You can explain the impact of hearing that on you, even if someone didn't intend to hurt you. You can connect it to a historical context, like, did you know the swastika was a symbol of Nazi Germany, etc.? You can ask a question like, do you think all Jews are good with numbers? You can broaden it to universal behavior. And my personal favorite in all of this is to circle back, because have been in situations too often where I didn't have the words or the timing didn't feel right, but being able to know that you can go back and say to someone, you know, a couple of weeks ago, we were in this group and you said XYZ and it really bothered me. And I want to explain why. That's an important skill to develop. It takes a lot of bravery, but, you know, it is a technique anyone can practice. So all these toolkit items are in the toolkit that I gave you. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to study it. There are two resources that I just want to flag because I think another takeaway from this group is to make sure schools are aware of resources that exist when incidents of bias, and I don't mean limited to anti-Semitism, take place in middle and high schools. There is a guide that is referenced in the toolkit, covers everything from the communications that one should expect from a school when that happens, which includes being timely. It includes being specific and calling out something as anti-Semitic, if that's what it is, or racist, if that's what it is, instead of using a euphemism that says, we found something hateful, you know, on the bathroom wall today. If you don't name it, people don't feel seen either. And there is a separate guide on school sports and bias that was developed with Maura Healey when she was Attorney General, and again gives guidance you know, in that youth sports space that is really so fraught. Think about the Duxbury football team that used the names of concentration camps as their football plays for 10 years. Or think about the Danvers hockey team, which had a horrible legacy of bullying, racism, and anti-Semitism that went on for several years. Guidance for parents and school administrators and athletic directors in this is sorely needed, and you can help get the word out. Oh, it is available online. So what I will do is make sure I get that so it can go out in an email blast to the community. Yeah. I can only touch on the work piece like really lightly, but yeah, anti-Semitism happens at work. And it not often enough is part of a company's DEI efforts. That's starting to change. Again, I just want to flag a lot of resources that would be available to you. And I think personally, it's really important to get comfortable talking about Israel. Obviously, not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. In fact, it's a time-honored tradition in our own country to criticize the government and the Israeli government. But understanding sort of the boundaries of that, when Israel might be singled out, when Israel's right to exist as, or Jewish self-determination in Israel is called into question. I mean, it's a very complex and nuanced set of conversations. Many of us have them with our kids at Thanksgiving, and it doesn't make it any easier. But getting comfortable with those conversations is, I think, an important thing and an obligation that we all have. And finally, I always end by saying it's really important to report incidents. If they're not counted, people, public data gets managed. So even if you think it's not important, you can report it. And it, the work that ADL does is not just to count the incidents, but we are in touch and I'm working with the people who've experienced incidents of anti-Semitism. So I'm gonna just leave this part of the presentation now with just saying that my challenge to this group, and it's a challenge that I know Steve and the Kulanu group that he's going to speak about has already picked up, is to see what we can do to lead awareness and action in our own community. And that's by raising awareness, it's by advocacy, it's by being a good ally for other communities that are suffering, it's by holding perpetrators accountable as well, and by taking solid action. So that's sort of what I want to leave you with tonight. Steve, do you want to talk next? Should we take some questions? What's best?
Thank you, Peggy. Can everybody hear me? So the Temple was invited to apply for the 2022-2023 ADL Kulanu program. And I think Peggy had something to do with us even knowing about it. Amy Travis asked me to put together our application, and we were selected along with another 113 congregations from all across the United States. There were Temple from Anchorage, Alaska, and Jackson, Mississippi. There were quite a few from New England, I noticed. We formed a small working group of people that were interested in this. I put a note in the newsletter, got a few volunteers. I drafted a few people, in particular, Linda Singer-Burke, who's kind of leading some of these efforts that I'll talk about in a minute here on our behalf. The Kulanu program focused in 3 areas and it met all through this past calendar year or academic year from September through now. The 3 areas were education. Peggy showed some of the slides about what is anti-Semitism. We spent several sessions going through Vlad Kaiken's who does ADL's research in this area and presented this in great detail. We can share some of that information. Well, you're going to give us some links to the ADL tools, but we could also put some of these presentations from the Kulanu team on the Temple website. Members of our working group also participated in a community of practice online seminars. These were webinars. Everything was online during the year. And those were with other New England congregations, and we shared information and best practices. So education was the first. The second was to prepare an action plan. And in one of our meetings, I invited Linda and Sheldon Cohn. I don't know if he's here, but they were part of our Temple Security Committee, and they presented the things that we've done to kind of make our temple more resilient and resistant to any kind of an attack that might come, and talked about the security things that we're doing. It was quite interesting, related to the building and safety and things like that, how we would respond to an incident. There was the incident in Stoneham that Peggy mentioned, and I believe the Rabbi Carey and also the rabbi in from the Melrose Temple both reached out to this family that was affected, as well as the ADL and the Stoneham police. The third area was community outreach. And Linda spent a lot of time talking with us about the way that she's gone about building relationships with the town of Winchester, in particular with the Winchester Police and Fire Departments. And I want to point out that we have Sergeant Mike DeRosa here this evening, who Linda has interacted with and talked about quite a bit, so and very positively, Sergeant. So Mike is the community liaison officer. I got that right? Okay. So we have a very good relation. You know, we rent the schools from the town. We rent the town hall for high holidays. Linda has done a very good job of maintaining our presence and interactions with the town government, and through Mike with the police. And I think she's met the new police chief that's come here. The other thing that they wanted us to do in community outreach was to hold some kind of events with potential non-Jewish groups in Winchester, such as what I think used to be the Winchester Interfaith Organization, and there's a social justice group. And we didn't quite get to that, but it's something that we might think about. The program was a 1-year program, and it's ended, although I just got an email today from Maddie Solomon that we can sign up and do it again next year if we want. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
Woohoo! So thank you very much to the 3 of you. And just want to say that for people who are in Shir Chadash, we're going to take ourselves upstairs to get warmed up. And all of everything we have is compostable. So if you just find the compost bin in the back there, that would be, and there's 2 of them in the back. That would be wonderful. And we will